Hello and welcome to our channel. My topic for today is love and legalities, things you need to know before you say I do. So I will start off with some generalities and I will hone in on specifics that I want you to put your mind to before you take, the big step of getting married. And congratulations, by the way, if you are, taking that step. It's fantastic that you found the one, and let's make sure that, you start off with a solid foundation. So first and foremost, I'm not going to be the first to tell you this. I hope you know that you need to have, it is essential for you to have, good communication skills, right? How do you talk to each other? Is it healthy? You want to make sure that if that's not something that you can say a solid yes to, that you work on it, okay? And if you need to get a therapist, counselor, support person, whatever you need to get that right, you need to. Communication is key, and communication is very important because when we're having those difficult, they're not even necessarily difficult, they're probably just uncomfortable legal conversations. If you have very solid communication skills, and by skills I just don't mean the words that you use and things like that, but if you're both able to communicate in a way that doesn't lead to conflict, that's going to be essential. How about your values? Have you discussed your values, your life goals? Financial compatibility. I'm not going to talk too much about your finances per se in terms of what you spend during the marriage, but that is a conversation that sometimes is worth having. A lot of times when we see people going through a separation, you can really see that somewhere in there is sort of this financial incompatibility. So just think about that. What are your expectations around things like parenting, and who stays home to take care of the children, again, to avoid resentment? Are you planning on having kids, for example? If you are, then are there any thoughts and expectations about who gets to stay home with the children and things like that? So your health and wellness, very important as well. So do again, make sure that you both understand each other and are able to support each other in the way that you want, right? Everyone's different, and communication, remember, number one, communication, very important. So just make sure that you have that down pat. So that's it for generalities. Okay, I am going to go right down to the legalities. So first off, and I'm going to just do this by talking about a few areas. There's a lot obviously that you can look into, and depending on your circumstances, there might be unique things that you need to think about. These are just high level items that you should put your mind to, that would typically apply to everyone. So I'm going to start on the question of spousal support. So when you're talking about those finances, and you're talking about having children, and the possibility of one person staying home and being that caregiver to the children, well, what happens if the relationship breaks down and one person has been in the workforce and the other person hasn't? Well, the default of the law is, well, there might be an entitlement to spousal support. Is that something that you want? If you don't, well, you want to make sure that you have the proper agreements and contracts in place to ensure that that's the case. In other situations, some people appreciate that there will be some entitlement to spousal support, but maybe you want to define what your exposure is now. Like, are you thinking, well, if there is a separation, I don't want to have to pay more than X amount of dollars. And if that's the case, and if you discuss this with your wife to be or husband to be, whatever the case may be, then you can define sort of what the outer limits or the upper limits of spousal support payable could be. So the point again is, think about it. Is there going to be spousal support or not? If there is, do we just leave it to the default of the law, or are we going to make sure that we define the parameters of what happens? And I don't want to leave the impression that it's only, this thought around spousal support is only applicable to people that have children. That's not the case. even parties that are married with absolutely no children, there's still that exposure to spousal support. So do think about what you want to happen in that situation and have that conversation. The other thought is around, child support. For the most part, for biological children of the marriage, that's it's almost a non-starter. It is what it is. You have to kind of work with the guidelines if your incomes are at certain levels. Now, if you have incomes that are above the guidelines, setting threshold of income, then you may want to discuss what child support could potentially look like if there is a separation. But what I find that a lot of people overlook is this conversation around child support for children that are not of the marriage, right? So children from prior relationships. And I know for a lot of people, they want to do right by the child. They want to be involved in their partner's, child's life, even if they're not the biological parent. And doing that creates a legal obligation for you. So if you're fine with, well, if your position is whatever happens, I will be content paying the full guideline table amount to support this child, then you don't have to do anything about it. But for most people, when a separation happens, they generally are their thought is, well, I don't want to have to pay child support for this child. That's something that their biological parents should have to do. So if that is your thought, if that's your position, then make sure you have that in writing. And but before you even jump to the writing phase, have the conversation. Make sure that you and your partner are on the same page about what happens with child support for children from prior relationships. And then property. What do you do with property, right? What do you do with just existing properties that you have, for example? Well, there's just different ways these can happen. But even properties that are acquired after you get married, you can decide to either waive any claims and be completely separate as to property, or you can decide to keep things, according to the default of what the law is, or you can create your own custom arrangement. And what I mean by that is you can say, well, I have 5 properties. We're going to be, I'm going to exclude 2 properties. These 2 properties, under no circumstances would they be touched. And then these 3, we can divide it, like whatever the case may be. Again, the point is you want to, be thoughtful, you want to be intentional, and you want to make sure that you have this open communication with your partner to make sure that whatever is happening, or whatever happens in the event of a breakdown of the relationship, is what you both intend. And I strongly think that parties that can have conversations around, a marriage contract, around what they want their finances to look like, around having property division conversations. I think couples that can have that conversation are a really solid couple, because it shows that they have great communication skills. There's a lot of trust and respect, and those are just great foundations for a great relationship. And chances are you're just going to do this marriage contract or cohabitation agreement and never ever have to use it. Just do it, tuck it under the bed somewhere, and it'll just be like your insurance. Okay, maybe not under the bed, but you get the idea. Okay, so when you're thinking about property, just decide, do we both want to just keep our properties separate, or what do we want to exclude some, or just say we're going to share everything that we acquire throughout this marriage? But in some situations, one party might be coming in with a home, for example, and that's the home that both parties live in. And while that might be great, you want to put your thought to, well, if this home becomes a matrimonial home, how do I want that dealt with? Well, the default of the law is, if it's a matrimonial home as of the date of separation, then you don't get to exclude the value of what that home was when you brought it into the relationship. You divide the complete equity in the home fully with the other party. If that's an outcome that you're comfortable with, then that's fine. If it's not, that's another conversation you need to have. And whatever the outcome of that conversation, I strongly suggest that you put that into the terms of a contract. If not, it really means nothing. The family residence. So in this case, I'm talking about homes that are bought after the marriage, right? So let's say you both come in to the marriage with no assets, or you've decided that you're going to exclude all of your previously owned assets. Well, what happens if during the relationship you buy a home together and you move into that home as your family residence? Well, you still need to be thoughtful and intentional about this, because you could decide to just take title to the home jointly, in which case it means you own the home, equally with rights of survivorship. But you may not want that outcome. So if you're thinking, well, whoever put the down payment to the home, and whatever proportion we put the down payments, that's how we want to take ownership to a home, then that's something that you need to talk about and document. So again, think about that. If we're buying a home, how would we like this to look, right? If I'm bringing $100,000 as a down payment and they're bringing $20,000, am I content with us taking title 50-50, or do I want our ownership to be based on how much we contributed? And the interesting thing with family residences is a lot of people do not put any thought to it. They just front the down payment, they buy property, and it's very unfortunate because a lot of people's expectation is, well, I contributed more to the down payment, so I should have more of the equity. That's not the way the law works if you're married. So you want to be very careful. And even if you're not married and you've taken title to this home jointly, well, there's a lot of hoops for you to cross to have to not share it equally. So, but you just want to know that the presumption, if you buy a property and title is taken jointly, the presumption is that you own it in equal shares, 50-50, and it doesn't matter whether one party put more than the other. Household contents, that's something that you need to think about as well. If you're bringing in, some people get, couches and credenzers and things like that they've inherited from, grandparents, family heirlooms and things like that. You want to make sure that you talk about that. If you're leaving, it might seem like a no-brainer to you that it's mine. I inherited this from my family. It's important to my family, so I should keep it. That might seem like a no-brainer, but what if the other party's perspective is, well, we enjoyed it during the marriage, and I've really gotten to like some of these items, so I think I should get a share of that. So that's why it's important to have these conversations so you're both on the same page. And again, document whatever you agree to. So what do you want to do with household content? Do you want to share it based on ownership, or do you want to just share your household content just equally in kind? Whatever the case may be, you need to deal with that. And then other issues, right? Like debts. How do you want to deal with that? And even disputes. So if there's, a breakdown in the relationship and there's a dispute about the agreement that you go into. So if you go into a cohabitation agreement or a marriage contract, what happens when there's a dispute? Do you want to mediate? Do you want to negotiate between counsel, try collaborative family law, or do you just want to jump right to litigation? Again, think about what kind of process and what kind of steps you would like to take to resolve any disputes that you may have. So those are the legalities, and I hope you found those helpful. And until next time, it's bye for now.